Does this sound familiar? I don't like most of the kids at school. They try to annoy me and ask me stupid things. I am what people call weird. I don't act like them or do the same things. Elijah, age 13. No one's ever told me that they want to hang out with me. I've always told them. I worry about saying the wrong thing that I can't take back. Dustin, age 16. Camilla, age 10, says, the other kids don't let me play games because I can get out of control when I'm happy. I'm way too different with my ADHD, my color, and my being new. It makes me feel bad. Nobody speaks Spanish here. Julia, age 14, says, when someone gives me feedback, I expect it to be bad. It's been that way so much. Why would this time be any different? Sometimes it feels like a punch in my stomach. It hurts so much. And Bree, age 11, says, the only friends I have are outside the boxers, too. We're like the dweebs. Inside the box, they're perfect and cool. Everyone likes them. Not a lot are nice to me, but they are boring. When you're outside the box, you're in the adventure. I love this quote by Bree because this means we're all in the adventure. So what is social resilience, the subject of our talk today? Now, resilience occurs when we take our skills from lessons in the past where we learned or succeeded at something, and we apply them to a new situation, especially one that challenges or frightens us. In fact, the word resilience comes from the Latin root of almost being able to dance again, something like that. Social resilience highlights the importance of collaboration, adaptability, and resourcefulness in sustaining well-being in uncertain and dynamic environments. Social resilience refers to the ability of individuals, communities, or societies to cope with, adapt to, and recover from external stresses and shocks. Living with a growth mindset, compassionate self-acceptance, and community support all nurture social resilience. Now, if we're talking about building resilience, then we're going to be talking about anxiety, which some of you know is one of my favorite topics because it's near and dear to my own heart as someone who lives with a lot of it. So what is anxiety? So there's physiological, cognitive, behavioral, all kinds of symptoms with anxiety. And anxiety is experienced cognitively and physically. It is adaptive and it helps our bodies prepare for real danger. Anxiety reflects all or nothing thinking and a negative expectancy. Um, sometimes with anxiety, there can be a false alarm, an episode of fear or worry in the absence of a genuine threat. And sometimes there's a real concern, but the reaction is disproportionate to the event itself. So what we want to do with anxiety is understand what the patterns are that are related to anxiety and focus on those patterns and shifting our responses to them, how we respond to triggers that make us nervous or feel unsettled versus staying in the content. Because when we stay in the content of a worry, we solve it, and then guess what? Something else comes up that pops up, another worry about something that's occurring in the world or could occur, and we have to deal with that. So it's a constant act of whack-a-mole. And instead, what I want us to try to think about today is the process by which we respond to the things that trigger us. Now, in terms of ADHD and anxiety, 34% of kids with ADHD have a generalized anxiety disorder or diagnosis, and that's versus 9% in the general population. 50% of adults with ADHD, and this is greater than 17% in the general population, have a diagnosis of anxiety. Now, these percentages don't account for people who just live with anxiety but don't necessarily have a diagnosis. And that's something that we really want to address because many people with ADHD live with a fear of messing up, of doing something wrong, of making a mistake when you didn't even know you were doing something that wasn't okay. And this comes from usually childhood experiences of being told that, you stop talking, you're too much, sit down, all the things that you shouldn't be doing. Complications from untreated anxiety can lead to depression, suicidality, eating disorders, and substance abuse. And there are two types of worry because there's a difference between nervousness, worry, and anxiety. Nervousness is an uncertainty with something new that diminishes when a skill is learned. Worry is expecting a negative outcome. And anxiety is a condition of over-responding to a fear or worry. We worriers turn what ifs into believable situations. And there are two types of worry that I want to draw your attention to. One is productive worry, and this is worry about doing things, homework, getting to your office on time, remembering to charge your phone before you go out for the evening. These traits contribute to the helpful planning side of worry. But when there are too many productive worries, when these worries start to accumulate, they can often shift into poisonous worry. And poisonous worry is worry about things you cannot control. And that could be thunderstorms, whether people will like you, if the train you're on is going to actually arrive on time, or will it be a few minutes late. You don't have control over these things. And what will happen sometimes is that productive worries will pile up so that people feel overwhelmed, and then they lose a sense of being able to manage or cope with what's going on. What are some traits of anxiety? So we know that anxious children and teens have lower self-confidence and often more problematic peer relationships, as well as academic difficulties and family conflict. Anxiety comes from this sense of, how am I going to keep myself safe in the world? I'm walking through the jungle. I hear a crick, crick. Oh my goodness, there's a tiger in front of me. I turn around, I go back to my cave. The next day, I go out to collect some berries and I hear a crick, crick, and my body has that same physiological reaction. My palms start sweating, my muscles tighten, my breathing gets more shallow because I'm ready to run from that tiger, but it's just a monkey swinging from a branch in a tree that broke. So I'm having the same physiological reaction to something that is not actually a cause for alarm. And this is what happens a lot for people who live with anxiety, for kids and, dare I say, adults. So there's a genetic component to anxiety, which is more like a predisposition to it, versus what we see with depression, where there is there is much more of a real genetic susceptibility. So with ADHD and anxiety, we want to remember that many kids and adults may not meet the diagnostic criteria for an anxiety diagnosis, but may still experience intense situational or general anxiety due to issues with time, emotional dysregulation, procrastination, and the possibility of social stigma. So we were talking today about the social anxiety spectrum. So when we talk about social anxiety, rejection sensitive dysphoria, perfectionism, and imposter syndrome, these are all components under the umbrella of social anxiety, which are related. Why are they related? Because they share a core sense of deficiency, a belief inside that you are not enough, that you can easily fail or be excluded because you're different. you're neurodivergent, and you don't deserve positive accolades. Years of receiving criticism and experiencing judgments contribute to somebody developing this core sense of deficiency. Now, what is social anxiety? Social anxiety is an intense fear in advance of an event or a situation, which could be embarrassing, where you're expecting humiliation of some kind. Um, RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, I'm going to call it RSD because it shortens how much I have to say, falls under the umbrella of social anxiety because it takes these worries to the next level. RSD occurs in response to a real or perceived rejection or criticism. Unlike social anxiety, it's not a formal diagnostic category. You're not going to find it in what's called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual. But it's a syndrome that was named by my friend and someone I respect so much, Dr. William Dodson, after years of observing traits and behaviors in his patients with ADHD. Perfectionism falls under this umbrella because it acts as an inefficient coping mechanism for managing anxiety related to disappointment, yours or someone else's. It's directly related to a need for approval. And imposter syndrome it really summarizes feeling like a fraud or a phony. It's related to perfectionism because since you're not perfect and you never will be, then you are fundamentally flawed. So let's talk about the key traits of social anxiety. So it's this debilitating fear of judgment where you could be exposed to embarrassment, and it is fundamentally attached to this core belief of deficiency. To get this diagnosis, it has to last for at least 6 months and restrict activities, interests, and relationships. An estimated 9 to 10% of adolescents without ADHD have social anxiety disorder. Dr. Thomas Brown believes that about a third of children and a third of adults with ADHD all suffer from social anxiety disorder. And really, it seems to come of age in middle school and adolescence, which of course is unsurprising, as that's a time when when young people are very focused on their peers. The diagnosis relates to the intensity of the distress and whether the reactions are out of proportion for someone's age, family situation, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual preference, and socioeconomic background. One of the things that we really want to think about when we're talking about social anxiety disorder is that when people have social anxiety disorder, they think they know what other people are thinking about them. And that is just not the case because human beings do not have ESP for the most part. They can't read minds. So there's an assumption that you think someone is negatively judging you based on your past experiences of being negatively judged that may or may not be what the person is thinking about you. So there's a kind of projective quality about social anxiety disorder. So what we see is that there's a trigger, like something that's social, like a conversation or a performance. And this could even mean carrying out a function in front of another person, like eating, or being observed buying a coffee at a cafe that actually freaks somebody out. That's beyond what the actual threat of the situation is. When people experience social anxiety, sometimes they experience it so intensely, it can include panic attacks with nausea, shaking, or perspiration. What are some components of social anxiety disorder? The cognitive part, the conscious thoughts based on these underlying assumptions and negative core beliefs that include patterns of rumination. You're the hamster on the wheel. You're thinking the same thing over and over again. Behavior, safety-seeking actions that really focus on avoiding things that are distressing for you. emotion, self-criticism, sort of shame, sadness, anger at yourself, and physiological responses, that panic, the kind of responses that we see in fight, flight, or freeze, perspiration, blushing, jittery limbs, quivering voice, stuttering, or nausea. Now, social anxiety is a liar. And the lies that it tells you, that it tells children and teens with ADHD are, you can't do it. What if scenarios are justified? You're not good enough. You don't deserve friends. Everyone's watching and judging you. You embarrass yourself all the time. Nobody really likes you. And the worst one is you don't matter. RSD. So RSD is a common coexisting condition with ADHD that falls under the social anxiety umbrella. And it refers to the intense feelings related to the belief that you've let other people down, embarrassed yourself, failed at something, or made a serious, unfixable mistake. And as a result, people pull back their support, their love, or their respect. RSD causes extreme emotional pain, sometimes even with physical symptoms. Your stomach really hurts, you have a terrible headache that plagues both children and adults with ADHD, even when no rejection has actually taken place. Sometimes people with rejection sensitive dysphoria have sensory sensitivities as well. It's very tough to recover from personal criticism or rejection. And the people with RSD often feel like they're living in a one down position that is based on shame. So there's a difference between guilt, I did something I regret, but I'm still a good person, and shame, I did something I regret and I'm a bad person. And what we see under the social anxiety umbrella is this type of shame. So perfectionism and imposter syndrome are related. Perfectionists are often driven by the fear of disappointing themselves or others. They tend to be all or nothing thinkers. If it's not completely right, then it must be a failure. They can set unreasonable standards and constantly compare themselves negatively to others, just as neurodivergent people often compare themselves critically to neurotypical peers. Perfectionists can be very sensitive to criticism and easily discouraged when they can't complete goals. And just like with worry, there are two types of perfectionism: productive or adaptive perfectionism that supports motivation, productivity, and persistence, and toxic or maladaptive perfectionism, which perpetuates negative self-esteem, rigidity, and defensiveness. So perfectionism is one way to control outcomes, which is a fundamental aspect of living with anxiety. So living with ADHD means, and living with anxiety means there's a lot of stuff that's happening that you don't know how it's going to work out. You feel insecure and uncertain. And so perfectionism is a way that you're trying to manage that, but it's not super effective because perfect doesn't exist. Like, the part of your brain that thinks you should be perfect is also not perfect. There is no perfectionism. And that is something that we want to teach our kids, that everybody stumbles and everybody makes mistakes. That's part of living and learning. With imposter syndrome, these are people who, most of the time experience perfectionism, but they also reject any praise or any positive feedback as luck. They can't take it in. They shrug it off, or they'll say somebody helped me or it wasn't a big deal. They'll minimize their accomplishment. But yet, just like perfectionists, they depend on others for validation and approval. So both perfectionists and people with imposter syndrome hold out their ADHD approval cup for other people to fill up. They don't know how to fill up their own approval cup. And that's something that we want to help our children learn, and that we ourselves could probably learn as well. Gunther, age 17, says, I feel like a lot of times I really do want to socialize and get to know people, but I'm so afraid that they're going to reject me. It's hard to fight my brain and try. So social media is a crucible for peer social influence, both positive and negative. Positive aspects are, hey, happy birthday, or way to go on some accomplishment, support, affirmation. If someone is if someone is being mean to you, your friends may rally around you to defend against a peer attack. There's pro-social behavior, standing up for what's right. Um, one of the challenges of social media is that it's also a crucible for negative peer social influence, criticism, bullying, exclusion. Likes and retweets give immediate approval from everything from what someone's doing to who they're following. And this actually is something that a lot of times we adults might miss what the cues are or the clues are for what that approval looks like. And many kids have prowess for manipulating gadgets beyond what their parents understand. Some kids, particularly girls who are tweens and teens, may think they don't exist if they aren't online, because online is part of life. We as adults may separate online life from in-person life, but for kids, it's much more fluid, and that can be challenging because it's a space for them to be cool. For me growing up, it was the mall. You went out to the mall with your friends on Saturday night. Now it's social media. And so online is a place to play and also rest. Um, so social media, however, has taken things that used to be private and made them public and tangible. And people forget this, particularly young people, because they don't have the sense to see into the future. They don't have that part of their brain developed. And so we all have a digital footprint. And as adults who are in relationship with young people, we need to remind them that this footprint is available to them later in life. It follows them. Colleges and schools will look at them, and when they apply, jobs may look you up online, and teens, because of their developing brain and their limited ability to see the future, may not be aware of the bigger consequences of what they're posting. The other challenge with social media is that it's filled with falsehoods. So there was a study in 2022 about TikTok and ADHD. It's an amazing study. And what it found is, after looking at the top ADHD videos on TikTok, 52% were misleading. 20%, 27% were personal experience, and only 11% of the videos came from healthcare professionals. That means that your children are learning things about ADHD or other subjects that are not from expert, educated, knowledgeable sources. This is something that this means that we as adults have to be checking in about what kids are learning and where and they're getting their information. So what fosters social anxiety? Bullying. So we talked a lot, I talked before about how the social media really fosters and feeds social anxiety with FOMO, and it's a public stage for conflict and support. And then we have, lurking and following people and hanging out. But the thing that I really want to discuss today is bullying, because online bullying is real. Now, I actually was bullied when I was in 6th grade. We moved to a new town, and there was a boy there who didn't like me, and I was put in the gifted program, and I was teased mercilessly. People spat on me. Is that a word? They spit on me at lunch in the recess. They put worms in my little brown paper bag lunch. Um, it was really miserable. And I went home every day from school for those first 2 months of school when we moved, crying. Luckily, I had a great teacher, Mr. Telenoff. I love you wherever you are. He put me at a table with 3 other girls who were also really smart, and we formed our own little group. So I had some support, and I also had a break. I'd get on the bus, I'd go home, I'd have my cry. I didn't have to talk to anybody or deal with anybody until the next day. That doesn't exist today. It doesn't exist today because bullying takes different formats. There's physical aggression, hurting people. There's relational aggression. And this is what we see mostly in social media. Starting rumors, exclusion, spreading gossip, taunting, getting people to gang up on each other. Neurodivergent kids are often targets because of their impulsivity, not understanding personal space, maybe trouble reading social cues or doing silly things for social approval that backfire. They might miss verbal cues or due to distractedness or inattention. So what I want you to think about is that there's a difference between teasing and taunting. So teasing is a light, fun thing you do with family or friends, people you care about without malice. Everybody's laughing together. Taunting is something very different. Taunting is a form of bullying. It's something you do to someone you don't like. It's intentionally harmful and hurtful. It involves humiliation, cruelty, and bigotry. In teasing, we're all laughing together. In taunting, everyone is laughing at one person. Now, in bullying, we have an aggressor and we have a victim, but we also have bystanders. And bystanders are really just as responsible as the aggressor because they empower the aggressors. They enable them to do harm. They may not be doing the tormenting with their own words or actions, but they're complicit. And often their motivations are complex because they're trying to stay out of the focus of they don't want to be, excuse me, I'm so sorry. They don't want to be the focus of attention. What types of bullying are you seeing in your world with your child right now? I'm curious, on social media or other platforms, what types of challenges are your kids facing? I do want to say a few more things about cyberbullying, that it's an unfortunate and dangerous side effect of social media, and it's on the rise, especially for girls, because girls are more peer-focused and prone to forms of bullying such as exclusion and rumors. And according to the CDC, whether it's in school or online, girls are more likely to be victims of bullying. In one study, 17% of girls and 13% of boys who were, we weren't differentiating between neurodivergent and neurotypical, experienced bullying. One of the things about cyberbullying that's so distressing is that harassers can send information very quickly, often anonymously, and target victims at any time of day. Non-heterosexual youth have reported higher incidents of bullying across the board. Now, let's lean into what are we going to do about all this? So what are the 5 C's of ADHD, my trademark method? How are we going to use this to manage anxiety? We're going to interrupt anxious thinking with breathing techniques. And the way we're going to interrupt anxious thinking is because we're going to slow down the amygdala takeover. What are you going to do when things escalate? We need a plan. We need a self-soothing strategy, some activities that you write down and put on a Post-it on your refrigerator or on their phone, something that they can access to help them manage themselves. Compassion. As adults, anxiety is so irritating. So we want to maintain our support in the face of irritating or frustrating behaviors that demonstrate how much a child feels out of control. We want to remember that anxiety is an ineffective attempt to create safety based on limited skills. Collaboration. We want to talk about logical ways to deal with scary thoughts or circumstances instead of avoiding them. So, how are we going to do this? We want to remember that good worriers have very creative imaginations. They just lean to the dark side. So, if you have kids who have trouble sleeping at night because they're worried about things, have them write down their worries and create, if they're younger children, they can take a shoebox and make a worry motel and put their worries in the motel, protect the motel with their stuffies at night so they're safe. And when they wake up in the morning, they can pick the ones they want to carry around. For older kids like teens, they can write down things that they're worried about to empty their brain. And then in the morning, they'll know I can look at my list again. One of the problems with worrying is that the brain just doesn't stop. It keeps going. And so we want to try to help the brain stop that hamster wheel by emptying it. Okay. Um, Consistency, routines as much as possible foster a sense of predictability over certain aspects of life in the face of so many other uncertain and unmanageable things that come our way. Routines provide comfort, but we don't want rigidity. We want to stick with similar responses more often than not. We're aiming for steadiness, not perfection. And lastly, celebration. Let's notice when our kids make efforts, when they actually might feel anxious or worried about something and they take a risk or they move towards it anyway. When you move closer to the thing you're most afraid of, you're worried about, it gets smaller. When you pull away from it, it gets bigger and bigger. So what are some interventions for social anxiety? Cognitive behavioral therapy with or without medication is the most effective treatment for social anxiety. Just like with ADHD, medications will help, but pills are not going to teach skills. We have to actively teach our kids skills to manage in social situations and to look under the hood at those core limiting beliefs and find ways to strengthen a positive sense of self. So our goal with social anxiety is to establish healthier alternatives to safety-seeking behaviors, to be able to be present in a situation instead of lost in the thoughts that you've created about what other people are thinking about you. So you can also use your thinking to develop mindfulness, to be curious about what's going to happen instead of worrying about it. So can you wonder instead of worry? Can you be curious about the other person you're engaged with, to take an interest in what they're saying or doing with reflective listening? How do you have a conversation? How do you show that you're listening? By repeating what someone's saying. Oh, you really liked blah, blah, blah. I like that too. That's how you create conversation. For RSD, we want to understand that kids with RSD are going to have really big feelings. And this means that we have to use the prearranged STAR approach: stop, think, act, recover. So these are prearranged tools such as time aparts, relaxation techniques, or other healthy self-soothing activities that allow them time to process their feelings so that they can then move into what's next. So stop, you're going to take a pause, figure out in advance what you're going to do during that pause, come back together for a think. What are we going to do next to move forward? Then you do that thing, and then you allow time for recovery. Processing, talking, teaching methods of responding, that all comes at least 3 hours after any incident, when people are actually slowed down and have moved on. Quit taking it personally is something I really would love you to walk away from this webinar with. Q-tip. What does it mean if you don't take it personally? Something, everybody in interactions, you have 50% and someone else has 50%. But for a lot of people with RSD, they take it on 100%, and it's not theirs 100% of the time. So we want to develop a few self-statements of encouragement, acknowledging strengths. You want to do this with your child to reduce the noise of the negativity. Things like, I'm stronger than I think. My mind is uniquely wired and creative. I can make a mistake and be a good person. I can get hurt and bounce back. How do we respond to bullying? What the tools for kids to respond to bullying? Encourage your child to speak up for themselves in non-provocative ways to assert strength. Remind your child that despite feeling picked on and perhaps isolated, they are not alone. Who are some true friends, and how can they meet them outside of school to nurture that friendship? How can you foster that? How many friends does somebody need? 3. One to spend time with. One to spend time with when the first person is not available, and one to spend time with when the first 2 people are not available. You don't need a whole posse of 20 friends. You need those 3 close buddies who you can rely on. Talk with teachers about facilitating connections through school collaboration on projects or sitting near like-minded individuals. Engage the school's assistants in fostering positive connections, and make sure that they're aware of the social dynamics that your child is facing. Create a safety plan for bullying experiences outside of the home. Whatever that's going to be, what are options for your child at school, and maybe if they play a sport, or if they're in a musical or something. What are situations where bullying might occur, and what is the safety plan? They need to be able to know that they can do something that's self-protective, and that won't necessarily be seen as retaliatory. One of the things that we want to do to foster social resilience is to teach social communication schools. Many kids with ADHD and social anxiety and RSD really need to feel the loving presence of caring friends and family. In fact, who doesn't need to feel the loving presence of caring friends and family? So, how do you do that? How do you connect with people? So we want to ask relevant questions by listening to what someone's saying, assessing what's happening by looking at people's faces. Greet someone with a smile or a wave. Ask open-ended questions: how, what, where, and when. This you can practice at home at the dinner table. Physical proximity and volume. Place yourself appropriately near others. In our culture, that's an arm distance length apart. Observe their volume and meet it. Instead of entering a room and saying, "Oh, what are you talking about? What's happening? What's going on?" Pause, listen, then join a conversation. Participate with curiosity, show interest in other people, not just talk about yourselves. And remember that everybody has insecurities, whether or not they're showing them. Lay off the self-criticism and listen. Turn down the volume on that internal negative voice that guesses what other people are saying about you, because it's often wrong. And finally, enjoy connecting. Enjoy sharing parts of yourselves that are special and fun with other people, what you're curious about, while receiving what's interesting and compelling about others. Start small with low-intensity activities. We can talk about a chit chat. That's usually not something that's an issue for kids, as it might be a little bit more for teens. It's certainly something for adults, but that takes progress. You don't have to like it, but you might need that skill, and you can practice it in low value, low intensity situations, like at the grocery store or at the library, by saying, "How are you today?" or "Thank you for helping me," something like that. How do we foster connections? We greet someone with a smile or a wave. We ask these open-ended questions. We listen and reflect back. And we remember that everyone has insecurities, whether they show them or not. Shame is in kids with ADHD, and dare I say adults, is about being different and less than. We'll see a lot of apologizing, avoidance, an inability to forgive yourself and sometimes others. There's holding on to past mistakes. And there's a belief that I'm fundamentally flawed because I have ADHD or I'm neurodiverse or I'm very sensitive. So with shame, shame says, you're a failure. If you mess up, you're a bad person. What kinds of things can we help our kids say to counter those statements? So I like to think that there's an ogre on one shoulder and a champion on another, an inner ogre and an inner champion. And our inner ogre is saying some of these statements that people have absorbed over time in a dysfunctional effort to protect our wise, vulnerable self in our belly. But really, what we need is to strengthen that inner champion, to strengthen things that we can say to ourselves, such as, I have unique strengths, or I have a talent, or I can be funny, or whatever it is. What are some things that kids could say to themselves? What most of the time people say to themselves are mean things that no one would say to anybody else. So if your child is having trouble thinking of something good that they would say to themselves when they're feeling bad, think about what a loving grandparent might say, or what your child might say to their favorite pet or only pet at your house, or to a friend who is having a hard time. These are the kinds of things that the inner champion needs to say to a person to help, sort of basically shut the ogre up and to start to build a sense of confidence. Um, Kyle, age 12, says, there's no such thing as constructive feedback. I don't want to hear it. It's all bad. I get sick of it. So these statements to counteract the negativity are really important. And they also help reduce perfectionism and reduce compare and despair. So Teddy Roosevelt said comparison is the thief of joy. So we want to help our kids look at themselves and where they've come from on their own path, their own trajectory, rather than looking over here and over here at what other people are doing and comparing themselves and seeing how they don't measure up. So, one thing that we can do at home is at dinner, maybe to do a high and a low of the day, or two highs and one low. One of my clients calls them two happies and one crappy. I love that. So that we're starting to draw attention to that when we sit down for a meal, or maybe before bed or some other time. But dinner is a good time to connect and to practice social skills. There's great research of something called the Dinner Project that talked about the value of family dinner. Maybe you don't want to have family dinner with no screens every night, but certainly a couple nights a week is my recommendation. So we're going to reduce social anxiety by building resilience. Resilience is the antidote for shame, anxiety, and low self-confidence. So we build resiliency by learning to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing and being disappointed, and believing that we can bounce back from things because we've done it before. Anxiety erases memories of success. So for many of our children and teens, we have to hold those memories. Oh, remember a time when blah, 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 and you were worried about this, but this is what actually occurred. Your kids are not going to be able to pull that out of their memory bank, particularly those who have struggled with working memory. You've got to hold that. So, resilience leads to fostering a mentality that taking risks is okay, even if there's worry about the embarrassment of an outcome. This is what a growth mindset is all about. Um, Children and teens with growth mindsets, adults with growth mindsets, understand that we get smarter through hard work, through the use of effective strategies, from receiving help from others when it's needed, and from stumbling, regrouping, and trying again. Okay. What are aspects of a growth mindset that we want to pay attention to? Identify islands of competency. What does your child like to do? What are they good at? How can you apply that and grow that so that that becomes something that they can walk around like feeling good about themselves, okay? Um, Character strengths, established or observed interests. These are islands of competency. Charismatic adults. This is not necessarily Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Jay-Z, anybody. I'm doing the whole music industry here. I think it's because the Grammys were on this week. But people who have empathy and care about you, someone who believes in you. You may be the charismatic adult for your child. I hope you are, but there may also be other people, and that's okay too. It takes a village, right? So if you are, if you are a charismatic adult for your child or for another child, a friend of mine is, raising one of her son's best friends, and she is a charismatic adult for that young man. She is someone who believes in him and treats him with respect and is helping him mature into a well-rounded, kind man. So this growth mindset is summarized by Jade, who's 12. Hopefully this works. If not, I'm going to have to find a new way to do it, to be brave. It's hard sometimes, but there's always a way to pick yourself up. This is the essence of social resilience. I'm not sure it's going to work out. I am going to be brave. It can be hard, but I believe that I will be able to pick myself up no matter what happens. And this is the trick to teach our kids. So we want to talk about fears of failure and what they are, when they emerge, where they come from, discuss potential obstacles and how you're going to meet them. And remember that yes starts the process of change and yet keeps it going. So we're going to nurture social resilience with radical acceptance, being able to accept situations that are outside of your control without judging them or yourself to reduce that suffering, to name your resilient part, give it a name, give that inner champion who is resilient a name. Mine's called Tina Trailblazer. Why? Because I love myself best when I'm hiking and I'm in the mountains. I feel confident and strong. That's my inner champion, and I will refer to her and talk to her. I might say, "Hey, Tina, what are we going to do in this situation?" And I know perhaps you think I'm crazy, but internal family systems has taught us that actually having parts and naming them is very helpful. Focus on what you can change. Mistakes are learning opportunities. Vulnerabilities are areas for improvement. They are not personal failures. So key takeaways about social resilience. You have this in your handout, but again, we're going to change the relationship to worry. We're going to identify those limiting core beliefs and plan positive self-talk phrases. We're going to move away from comparisons, use Q-tips, practice social skills, and shift from worry to wonder. I hope you'll stay connected with me. Please scan this QR code for your free downloadable. That's my gift to you about helping effectively manage social anxiety in neurodiverse children and teens. Thank you so much for joining me again. Please get your downloadable right here. And check out my website and my 2 new groups that are coming. I'm so grateful to Chad for inviting me for this wonderful webinar.